Good morning, everybody, and welcome again to today's webinar, which is our first ever WineVine Online Wine Club, Rosés. This is presented by the New York Wine and Grape Foundation, and we're so happy to have everybody joining us. My name is Julie Purpura Hosbach, and I'm the Communications Manager here at the New York Wine and Grape Foundation. I'm a certified sommelier through the Court of Master Sommeliers, a certified specialist of wine through the Society of Wine Educators, and WSET III certified through Wine Spirit Education and Trust. Basically, all of those things mean I'm a big wine nerd and love discussing and appreciating wines with everybody. Before we officially kick off, I want to thank everybody for their involvement in the New York Wine and Grape Foundation this year. We're looking forward to new and exciting initiatives and benefits for our consumer members. We plan on continuing to build our educational programming both online and in person, so stay tuned for more webinars and events. And if you have any requests for specific topics or new ideas, please email me or call me. I will put my contact information in the chat bar for you to see. You will also get a copy of this recording following in about 24 hours. And now back to today's business at hand. If you have any questions, again, use that Q&A feature. There's a bottom toolbar for you. I attached a tasting sheet for you in the email with the link to join. Hopefully you all have it. You can feel free to use it or not use it. As I said, we'll be sending out a recording of this to all participants following in about 24 hours. So today we're talking about rosés from across New York State. Hopefully everybody was able to get the wines to join in with us today. But if you're just listening in, please feel free to share thoughts and comments and ask questions as well. So our three wines today we have are Sheldrake Point Winery's Dry Rosé. This is 100% Cabernet Franc, 2018. It was harvested this past October. Last year's 2017 was our New York Wine Classics Best Pink wine of the entire 900 plus entries that we had, and that is from the Finger Lakes. The next wine we'll be tasting is White Cliff Vineyards 2017 Rosé of Pinot Noir, and White Cliff Vineyards is in the Hudson Valley. And then lastly we'll be tasting Wolfer Estates 2018 Summer in a Bottle, which is a blend of multiple grapes we'll talk about as we taste that wine. Does anybody have any questions so far? Okay, so we're going to go through basic wine appreciation steps. So whatever your comfort level is in the boxes of the tasting sheet, if you have it in front of you, I put boxes for seeing the wine, smelling the wine, sipping, and then savoring it. And we're going to go through each of those steps, and as we do this every month, you'll probably become much more fluent and familiar with it and much more comfortable. As I said, there's no stupid questions. Don't hesitate to ask any throughout our session today. And if you have any questions afterwards, feel free to email me anytime. So the best way to appreciate wine is under optimal lighting. Hopefully you're under good light right now and against a white backdrop. So if you have nothing else, maybe use your piece of paper. You want to pick up your first wine. You want to tilt it at about a 45-degree angle. And we want to look at a couple of different things when we're looking at seeing a wine. So the first is it clear or cloudy? And chances are, more than 90% of wines probably on a shelf in this day and age are clear, but clarity is a sign. Actually, if a wine is cloudy, it doesn't necessarily make it bad or anything. It just didn't go through as many clarification steps. But that's what sommeliers and people appreciating wine are talking about with clarity. Is it clear or cloudy? If it's cloudy, it's kind of like the thickness of milk, right? That kind of cloudy, and it's just from proteins that are left in the wine. What color is it? So today we're going to have all different shades of pinks. But in general, when you're looking at the color of a wine, it depends on the grape varietal itself that was used to make the wine, how thick or thin the skins are, the natural pigment color within the skins of the grapes that were used to make your wine, production methods. So especially with pink wines, we'll talk about what makes a pink wine pink versus red or white, but how long it was on skin contact for, how long you let a wine age for affects the color. So red wines get darker and more brickish brown color as they age. Red wines get lighter brickish brownish as they age, a little bit of brown to it. White wines get darker, more golden in color. And pink wines tend to get more salmon-y, orangish in color as they age. Any questions on what we see? So if you're looking at this wine at a 45-degree angle, if you have it at home, I'm seeing that it's clear. And I would call it a light pinkish salmon color, right? There's a little bit of orange to it. So again, if you are taking notes today, feel free to jot them down. You can also look for any other things in your wine that you want to talk about, but those are kind of the big reasons we look at our wine. The next thing you want to do, and I didn't put a box in here for it, but you do want to swirl your wine to help release the aromatics up into your nose. About 85 to 90% of what we taste actually comes from our sense of smell. So step 2, smelling your wine, is really super important to be able to taste. It's, I think as we all know, no fun to taste wine when you have a cold. It's no fun to taste anything when you have a cold and your nose is stuffed because you can't really taste, right? So it's really important to always smell your wine. So after you swirl it for a while, you're gonna stick your nose in and just take a couple of inhales, a couple of times, and think about what you smell. And again, for those of you that are new to wine appreciation or newer to it, you pretty much always will smell some categories of fruit in your wine. You might smell some elements of earth, and that means different things in pink, white, and red wines, whether it's wet rocks or soil or like a mossiness or wet falls. So there's usually some sort of aspect of earth. And then sometimes there's floral components in wine. Sometimes there's herbaceous components in wine. Again, we're not having red today, but when we get to reds or whites that are oaked, sometimes you get a whole new set of aromas that are associated with oak, like leather, tobacco, baking spices, perhaps vanilla. So there's a lot of different things we smell. Different production methods during fermentation will create certain specific smells. So don't be shy. Go ahead and write, share. You can type in the toolbox in the chat bar what you smell. So I don't know what you're getting at home, but I definitely get some red berries, strawberry, raspberry. Anybody else? Feel free again to type in the chat bar what you're smelling. I definitely get some floral, and you by no means, I'm definitely not a floral expert. I can usually pick out roses and lilies, but aside from that, I can just say flowers. And the Court of Master Sommeliers, as you're going through your training, they say, are they white, yellow, purple, or red flowers? What do you think your guess would be? So I'm picturing yellow flowers. And then I do get a bit of like, imagining you're, walking across next to a waterfall, kind of that wet rocks aroma, or next to a stream. And you can get several different aromas in any one wine. So when we talk about the intensity of aroma, we're talking about, can I smell it from a ways back, or do I really have to stick my nose in and smell? When we're talking about the complexity of an aroma, if it's a complex, you might have, 10 different things you're smelling, you're picking up a lot of different things. And if you're, only able to smell a few things, maybe it's not as complex. But that's the difference between complexity and intensity. Any more anybody wants to share in this one? All right, so the next step is to sip your wine. You're gonna take a sip. If you're spitting today, if you're doing this on your lunch break at work, or just choose to, you wanna make sure when you take your first sip that you coat it around your entire tongue, because there's different spots on our tongue that pick up sweet, sour, bitter, salty. You wanna pay attention to the structural elements of a wine, which we're gonna go through, and that's acidity, so like mouth-watering, jaw-tensing, mouth-refreshing characteristics, whether there's sugar or the absence of sugar, which we call dry. Okay, so do you taste any sweetness, and where do you think it is? And again, if today's your first day in wine appreciation, it might be hard for you to discern, is it low, medium, or high, like we talk about the wine world, but as you taste through more and more of these, you will become an expert, I promise you. Tannins are generally associated with red wines. Tannins are found in the skid seeds and stems of grapes, as well as in oak barrels. So mainly with red wines, but also white and pink that have oak. Pink wines, depending on their method of production. So if they had skin contact, but it was just minimal, you may pick up like a low level of tannins. And again, tannins are like this mouth drying texture. It makes you want a glass of water, whereas acidity makes you feel mouth refreshed and crisp. So go ahead and take your first sip. And if you need to take a couple, go for it. Think about it for a second, maybe jot some notes down on what you taste. And we'll go through a systematic approach with all our wines, tasting through those structural elements. So acidity. Acidity, again, is like biting into a lemon. Your jaw tenses, your mouth waters. If you pulled your chin in, you would have the propensity to drool. So characteristically, Riesling and Sauvignon Blancs are really high in acidity. If you're from northern New York, those cold hardy hybrids have very high acidity. Those are just some examples. There are many more that do, but this across the world of wines would probably be classified as about medium acidity, this first one. And what do you think about the sugar level? So again, dry means you don't taste any sugar. Medium, so in the sugar world, instead of doing the low, medium, high, we generally do dry, off dry, or medium dry, and then semi-sweet or medium sweet, and then sweet. And that's generally, you kind of referenced the International Riesling Foundation scale. You'll sometimes see those scales on the back of bottles. They help consumers. There are not any on these bottles, but often on Riesling bottles and sometimes on other varietals, you'll see the scale. And dry is anything less than 1% residual sugar. Off dry is 1 to 2% residual sugar. Semi-sweet or medium sweet is 2 to 4% residual sugar. And then sweet is anything above that, and that can be a wide range. If you're having some styles of wine, especially dessert wines, you can have very like 15% residual sugar, again, very sweet, or sweet could just be, just into that category at 6%. So there's a wide range in the sweet category. So I see we have comment, not bone dry. I completely agree. So it would probably be classified on that International Riesling Foundation scale in the dry category of 1%, but there's definitely a little bit of residual sugar, just a touch to balance it off. And if you go to Sheldrake Point Winery's website, they actually do have the tech sheets available, and this wine is at 0.6% residual sugar. So awesome job. Next, we're going to talk about, tannins. Again, much more commonly discussed with red wines or heavily oaked white wines. This wine was cold soaked, so it did have a little bit of skin contact time. So again, we do get a very low amount of tannins in this wine. I'm just making my notes as I'm talking. So these are the various structural elements. Often we also talk about, if you take another sip, pay attention to, in the savor category, we're talking about how long is the finish. Is it short, less than a couple seconds, medium, maybe 3 to 5 seconds, or a long finish, does the flavor really last more than 5 seconds? Do the flavors and structural elements? So go ahead and take another sip. What do you think about that finish? How long do the flavors last on your tongue? For me, I would say this is pretty much a between short and medium finish. Another aspect of wine that's also talked about during wine appreciation is the body of the wine, the weight of the wine, which is basically the viscosity in technical science terms, and that's composed of the sugar content and or the alcohol content of a wine. So generally speaking, wines with a lot of sugar content and or wines with a lot of alcohol in them or higher on the alcohol scale tend to have more body. So what do you think the body was on this? It's a hard thing to kind of wrap your head around when you're new to the wine world. The best way to maybe think of a comparison is think about the world of milk. So, is it skim milk? That would be a light body versus 2% milk, which is more medium body, or is it like whole milk cream in your mouth? And then that would be more like full body, the weight of it in your mouth. So for me, this is a pretty light-bodied wine. And people can perceive the alcohol content. I know it sounds probably crazy a little bit at first, but the more you taste and practice wine appreciation, the better you'll become at discerning what the alcohol content of a wine is. So generally, well, first off, let's go through the Alcohol, Tobacco, Tax and Trade Bureau calls table wine. Does anybody know what the percentage rate is that a wine in the US can be classified as a table wine? Feel free to put it in the chat bar if you know. It formerly, for several years, has been 7 to 14%, but just in the last year, it has been raised to 16% because a lot of West Coast wines, particularly California, have higher alcohol contents. And there's a whole bunch of taxes and background story to why it's important to know the alcohol content in terms of taxes and reporting for the TTB, the nickname or the short and abbreviated name for the Alcohol, Tobacco and Trade Bureau. But most wines for consumer, it's important for consumers to know because you want to know how much alcohol you're consuming in your glass. It's quite different if you're having a bottle or a glass of wine of 8% alcohol versus a glass or a bottle of 15% alcohol and the rate at which it affects you. So most wines across the world are pretty much between 11 and 15%. And whites are typically on the lower end. There's always exceptions in the world of wine. Never say never and never say always, and this I have learned. And reds are generally more like 13 to 15, again, in hot climates, even above 15% alcohol. So if you, back to our picking up the perception of alcohol, generally if you feel no warming sensation or you maybe feel like a little bit in your nose, you would say it's under 10% alcohol. If you think you might be feeling a little bit of a warming sensation in your throat, think more like 10 to 12% alcohol. And if you're feeling a really warming sensation in your chest, it's usually 13 and up. So does anybody want to take a guess at this? Or maybe you already have your spec sheets in front of you on where the alcohol percent is. It definitely feels like around 12% to me, 11.5, 12%. And wineries don't have to say the alcohol amount. They're not mandated. They can just say on the bottle of wine, table wine. But let's take a look and see if it is on the bottle. So if you turn around the bottle, if you have it in front of you, not only does it say 100% Cab Franc, but it does say ALC, alcohol content 11.9%. So see how you did with your guesses. And I promise you'll become better at it. The more you practice. Practice, my mom always said, practice makes perfect. Definitely true in the world of wine appreciation. All right, so what were your overall comments? Definitely jot down somewhere, whether it's in the last category or the first category, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how did you like it? You know, I always think it's great to take notes. I always make my husband take notes with me when we try a new wine, because you want to remember it and evaluate whether you liked it or not. And maybe don't have to take as long as we just did to evaluate one wine, but I highly recommend having a wine journal. It definitely helps you go through steps of wine appreciation, and as I said, you'll become really fast at these steps. It doesn't take us long, but you'll have notes, you know, is it worth buying it again? And certainly there are hundreds of thousands of wines throughout the world. You know, it's okay to not like them, some of them. I'm sure there are many that you will like. But keep in mind when you're rating it, you know, if it's not flawed, I would still give it, you know, at least a 5, right? And then between 5 and 10, you know, how much? 10 being, wow, it blew your socks off, you love it, best wine ever. 5 being like, it wasn't maybe my style or my favorite type of wine, but it was, you know, still made well. You can use any scale you want, but that's generally what I recommend. So are we ready to move on? Any questions about Sheldrake Point's Dry Rosé? Any comments, thoughts you want to share in the toolbar? Okay, don't be shy. Remember, there are no stupid questions. The next one we're going to taste is the White Cliff Vineyards Rosé of Pinot Noir. And if you have any left of your Sheldrake Point, you know, take a moment to compare the two in color right now, because there is a difference. So both kind of have that hint of salmon color to them, that little bit hint of orange, but I would say the White Cliff has a little bit more color intensity to it, whereas the Sheldrake was a really light pinkish pink salmon-y color. This one has more intensity to the color. And is it clear or cloudy? Ask yourselves, you know, if it's easy way to tell that it's clear is if you can see through it, which I easily can clearly see through. So I would say it's clear, medium, pinky salmon color. Any other items that you see? So, as I said last year, the Sheldrake Point Winery won the best pink wine against all other pink wines submitted, both dry to sweet. And so we have a member on saying they think that this might win yet again. I don't know what your thoughts are. We haven't tasted through all 3. Let's see at the end if we have a general consensus on favorites. Most likely we won't, because wine is so subjective, and just like I love apples and you may love bananas, same thing with wines. All right, so we looked at it, we established the coloring. So let's talk a little bit about, let's take a break for a second, and I know the tasting of the wines is the best part of this, but let's talk a little bit about why the color might be different. As I said, with pink wines, probably more than any other category, the color of pink can range. Sometimes you get like a very dark ruby pink, and sometimes you get a very light, like ballerina slipper color pink. Sometimes you get more, the first 2 we've had have had like a salmony hue to them. And they can be from almost clear, almost looking like a white wine, to, again, almost looking like a red wine. So rosés are made in a lot of different production methods. And as I said, part of the color of a wine depends on the actual grape. So the grape skins, the tint of it, the thickness of it. So Cabernet Franc was the first wine, Pinot Noir is the second wine. Pinot Noir is actually a really thin-skinned grape and usually is pretty light in color. Definitely in the world of red wines, Pinot Noir, like if you were blind tasting wines, Pinot Noir would be usually one of the lighter ones you would see. But again, there's production methods like leaving it on the skins longer that can affect its color too. So our White Cliff Rosé might have stayed on the skins longer. So to make a pink wine, let's back up another step. The basic alcoholic fermentation equation, if you want to get really, I'm getting my real wine nerd on now, but the basic alcoholic fermentation equation will help explain a lot of processes as we move forward in months tasting through, is is sugar from the grapes plus yeast, whether they be natural or we add them, and that equals our alcohol, the actual alcohol percentage, and the wine you're tasting, but it also has byproducts of carbon dioxide and heat. Now back to the beginning of that equation, I guess it's kind of a side note of the equation, but when we're making wine, the color is produced by how long, or what makes a white wine different than red wine is white wines, the grapes get pressed and off their skins immediately and go into fermentation. So they don't generally have contact with their skins. Also, their skins generally don't have color pigment to them. So in the steps of making wine for white wines, you know, we pick them, we harvest them, we crush to stem them, we press the skins off, and then we go through fermentation. And again, that's the part where we go through that conversion of sugar and yeast, creating alcohol. With red wines, the usual critical difference in steps is that we harvest, we crush to stem. Depending on the method, they might not crush to stem, but generally they do that, but then they go right to fermentation on the skins. And so red wines get their color from the pigments in their skins and spending time. Now again, that time can be a couple of hours, generally in the case of rosés, so it's light pink instead of red, to multiple weeks for red wines sitting on the skin. So the amount of time each of these rosés spent on the skins will affect the level of pinkness that they are. And that's, so when you make pink wines, often the production method is, you know, we do some sort of cold soaking or skin fermentation just for a brief time, and then we press off and go on with the fermentation process. You can in the US, not in every country, in some countries it's more regulated, you can in the US take a red wine and a white wine and blend them together just like in our class, red plus white equals pink. So that is a way to make pink wines in the US. And it is allowed in other countries too, so some not, some it is. But in New York you can do the shortened contact period or cold soaking. You can do the red plus white and blending to make a pink wine, and you can do, some winemakers choose to do a French term called saignée, which is bleeding off. So it's when the red wines get crushed into stem, the juice down below, they bleed off or pull out the juice as it's just starting to go through fermentation. So those are how we get our different variations of pink in a pink wine. All right, back to, sorry for that little road diversion or diversion off our road. Let's get back to appreciating the White Cliff. So we went through the color, let's swirl and smell. Again, take a couple of big sips, or a couple of big inhalations of this wine, big sniffs. And again, be thinking about all those different fruit categories, floral, herbs, spices, any earthiness. This one I get a lot of floral. Again, I'm not a floral expert, but I would say floral. I get some more, a little bit, the strongest fruit to me is more of the stone fruit category, like peach, apricot. Again, that like wet rock or maybe mossiness as you're walking along a waterfall or a stream character. Little cherry blossom. Does anybody get anything else? Or have any questions about the smell? All right, go ahead and take a sip. All right, so in terms of acidity, that mouth-watering, jaw-tensing, like biting into a lemon, do you think, before you say low, medium, or high, if you're new, do you think it had more or less than the sheldrake point? And if you still have some, you can go back. Again, biting into a lemon, jaw-tensing, mouth-watering, propensity to drool. I would say that this one has a little more acidity than the sheldrake, but I wouldn't quite classify it as high. So medium plus acidity. That's between the pluses and minuses, make it fall between low, medium, and high. Again, you can make whatever kind of notes you want. In terms of dryness, do you think this one is dry, in the middle, or in the like semi-sweet category, or full-blown sweet? Do you actually taste sugar? And another good point to think about when you're evaluating wine is very fruity wines tend to often make us think sweeter than it actually is, because fruits are sweet. So if you ever want to be really sure about whether it's sugar you're tasting or fruit, if you plug your nose and take a sip of the wine at the same time, all in the sake of wine appreciation, right? If you do that, you'll be to our tongue only picks up, again, sour, salt, sweet, or bitter. So like you'll actually be able to taste sugar or the absence of no sugar there, but not be able to smell the fruit. And so that'll help you clarify if a wine is actually dry or has sugar in it, or whether it's just the fruit making you think that it's sweeter than it is. And this one I would say is around that border of off dry to dry, right? It's probably right around 1%. Maybe 0.5%. Again, it's similar to the first one, that there's probably a touch there, but I'd say it's probably still classified as dry. And tannins, again, that it's more of a coating of kind of like, tannins are kind of like a chalk coating your teeth and tongues, like an astringency feeling of smoothness, but of dryingness. And again, this one I would say very low. And if you want to take another sip to evaluate the finish. How long does that finish last? I'd say that this one's a little bit more for me, maybe like a medium finish. It definitely lasted a few seconds, those flavors. I got a little bit more of the berry fruit, definitely on the palate, than I did on the aroma. Because when you taste, you often taste a lot of the similar things to what you smell, but you also want to be thinking you might get some new elements to the wine when you taste it. So feel free to take those notes down too. What did you actually taste flavor-wise? And what do you think the alcohol content is on this wine? Sometimes on the back, sometimes on the front. This one is, if you have the bottle at the very bottom of the front, 12% alcohol. So very similar, and maybe you're just starting to feel a warming sensation again in your throat. All right, any questions on our White Cliff Vineyards Pinot Noir Rosé? Okay, so our last wine is from Long Island, Wolfer Estate. It is their 2018 Summer in a Bottle. Make sure you pour it for yourself. And then before we even start smelling it, we're gonna wanna take a look at it. So again, maybe you wanna compare against the other two you have. I would actually say that I feel like this one is kind of in between the color intensity of the other two, but still a light pinkish, I'd call it light pink with just a little touch, and maybe it's the lighting I'm in, but just a touch of salmon to it. Yes, this is a beautiful bottle. So we just had a comment about what a beautiful bottle this is. I formerly worked in some tasting rooms and retail shops, and definitely this bottle is a hit for its pretty appearance around the decorative appearance around the edge. A lot of people have come in and told me they reused it for, you know, a vase for flowers, or it definitely gets you in the summery spirit. I think in general, rosés just make me think summertime, which is why we kicked off with it. Based on our survey we sent out to all of you, rosés were the #1 requested, but also it's totally applicable because summertime is definitely when a lot of people are drinking rosés. Though you totally can drink rosés year round. You don't feel like you have to keep them just locked into a couple of summer months. And while we're looking at it, we talked about the color. Is it clear or cloudy? It is clear. Does anybody see anything else in their glass that they want to talk about or ask about or have any differing opinions? Again, I'm going to say light pink, salmon. Nope. Okay. Go ahead and swirl and smell. Take a couple of smells. What do you get in the aroma of this wine? I get that stone fruit again, apricot. I get hints of red berries, little, maybe even tart cherry. I totally picture when I'm smelling rosés, I totally picture sitting in a meadow with you have some flowers, you have your strawberries and raspberries out for a picnic, you know, there's a stream or a waterfall in the background. It's the image I get. Often when you're appreciating wine, it brings some sort of memory or image to you, so yours might be completely different, but that's what comes to mind when I smell rosés. So again, some more of that wet rock or stream. Lots of fruit, just a touch of flora on this one. And again, feel free to always go back and compare to the other ones. What makes it different? All right, go ahead and taste it. Take another one, be sure, and again, be thinking about, is your mouth watering? Do you want a glass of water? Do you feel mouth refreshed like you just had a glass of water? That's kind of the opposite between tannins and acid. Do we taste any sugar? Do we need to plug our nose and double verify? So again, for the sake of wine appreciation, if you're not sure if there's sugar or not, plug your nose, take a sip. With your nose plugged, did you actually taste sugar? All right, so acidity. Of the 3 wines, I would say that this one has the most acidity, medium plus the high, that mouth-watering. And again, when we go through these, there's no right or wrong, or one is better than the other. It's all about what you like. Wine is subjective. So, you know, some people like wines with a lot of acidity. Some people like wines with lower acidity. Some people love tannins. Some people often don't like red wines because they don't like tannins, that mouth drying texture. Some people like dry, some people like sweet. Some people, it depends on the occasion. Whatever you like, and that's fine. I would say low, that mouth drying effect is there a little bit, probably the most of the 3 wines again, but in the world of wines, I would still say overall just low tannins, maybe medium fineness. Sugar, when you plug your nose, there is a little bit of sugar there. I would say it's around 1%. Again, you can look at tech sheets if you want, but I would say that this is the most of the three, probably 1 to 1.5% residual sugar. So just off dry. What do you think about the alcohol content? Do you feel it in your nose, throat, chest? Not at all. Of the three wines we're tasting, Long Island is the warmest of the climates. They have more of a maritime climate, while the rest of New York State has more of a continental climate. So they do have a little bit of a longer growing season, which back to our basic alcoholic fermentation equation, remember sugar plus yeast equals alcohol. So the more sugar in our grapes doesn't mean a sweeter wine. If we let the whole fermentation process go out, more sugar initially equals wines with higher alcohol content. Now again, granted, the winemakers have a lot of control and can stop the fermentation sooner and leave residual sugar, thus the term residual sugar, in any wine, but generally wines that are in warm to hot climates and have riper fruit to begin with tend to have alcohol contents that are higher. All right, so where do you think the alcohol content is on this one? I definitely would say it's probably, before I look, I would definitely say I think it's probably similar, but maybe a little bit more than the other two. Again, slightly warmer climate, and it is on the front of the bottle, 12.8%. What did you think the finish was like on this wine? Feel free to take another sip. How long do those flavors last? For me, this one definitely, I would say it was like a medium finish. It lasted a few seconds. That acidity being a little bit higher, that sugar there, it definitely leaves those flavors on your palate for a little bit. All right, any thoughts or comments? Make sure you denote which one was your favorite, what you liked, or maybe you liked them, maybe you love them all, hopefully. I definitely wanted to showcase different regions and different grape varieties. So the first one was 100% Cab Franc. The second one was Pinot Noir. Does anybody want to guess what grape this is? What do you think this one is made from? Same, different? And if you've already looked at the tech sheet, or I think I hinted at the beginning something about the different production styles. So this one is a blend. Interestingly enough, it is 48% Merlot, which is a red grape, but it's then 41% Chardonnay. So, and then you're like, that doesn't equal 100%, but you're absolutely right. So there is 3% Riesling and 2% Cab Franc and 6% Gewürztraminer in there. So 5 different grapes went in to make this summer blend, and a mix of red and white grapes. All right, any other thoughts or comments, questions? I did promise you I would, as you're finishing up and evaluating, think of any questions, I will put in the chat bar. They are all definitely well-made and tasty wines. 3 great examples of 3 different regions across the state that are all producing high-quality wines. I don't know if you can see on my glass, we always say diversity is one of our strengths. There are lots and lots of different grape varieties, probably hundreds of thousands of different grape varieties grown throughout New York State. And we have different climatic differences in each of the regions which affect the wines. We have obviously the winemaker of every wine affects them, and the production methods they use. The 3 main categories of what makes any wine different is the grape varieties used, right? The grapes themselves make one wine taste different from another, as we saw. Where the grape is actually grown in terms of climate. So the actual temperatures, the bodies of water, the soil subsets. Many different factors go under that. And some people call that term terroir, Terroir is what it looks like. It's a French term, kind of no direct translation, but something to the idea of the sense of place where the grape is grown. And then the third element is the production process and all of the steps during fermentation, production, harvest, you know, from mechanical to hand harvesting, to when grapes are pressed, how long they're fermented, what clarification steps they go through, whether they're in stainless steel or oak, how long it's aged before it's released. All of those affect a wine too. So I will leave my information in the toolbar so that you have it and you can email me. Please reach out with your feedback, what you would like to see in the future, how we can make this better. If you enjoyed it, I would love all that feedback, as this is our first ever WineVine online wine club. Thank you so much for being part of it today. As I said, you will get a recording also sent to you. Following tomorrow, you should have it. Next month, July, is going to be sparkling wines. So get excited for that. I do have the calendar planned out through December of 2019, of which from there on we'll be tasting varietals. So August Cabernet Franc, September's Riesling, and I'll send out which exact ones we're going to be tasting. If you can't ever get the exact producer we're tasting, I do try to pick 3 from 3 different regions across the state. If you can try to get one from the same region as a fill-in, you'll still be able to have a great experience tasting New York wines, and we'll talk about again what makes it different, what you liked, what you didn't like. And yeah, thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you had fun. Hope you have a great day. Happy summer.